Hello, can you hear me? Wonderful. Wow. Everybody set here? So great to see all of you here. I'm really, really excited to meet all of you. I'm excited that we have this amazing group of women who are going to share their stories, and I hope that you'll all share some of your stories with us when we get into the discussion portion of this program. My name is Theo Spanos-Dunphy, and I am the President and Executive Director of Global Citizen Circle. And on behalf of the 3 global organizations that are sponsoring and co-hosting this event, Global Citizen Circle, Social Change Initiative, and Southern New Hampshire University, I want to welcome you all here today. I also want to welcome those of you who are joining us via live stream and let you know that we want you to also participate in the discussion, and you can do that by tweeting questions or comments to the hashtag Global Citizens Award. So please feel free. We will be watching our Twitter to see if you have questions, and we'll bring them to our discussion leaders. I'd also like to welcome our Muslim guests here today and wish you a happy Ramadan. I want to let you know that though we'll be having dinner after the discussion, we have prepared with the hotel boxed meals if you'd like to take a meal with you after the dinner time. We also have a room if you'd like to go. There's a room right across directly across the Stowe room if you'd like to go to that room to pray. So just wanted to let you know that that was available if you'd like that. Lastly, I really wanted to just introduce one of our co-hosts and good friend, Martin O'Brien from Social Change Initiative. He's here from Belfast, Northern Ireland, and he will now introduce our distinguished discussion leaders.
Thanks very much, Theo. I'm Martin O'Brien, and I'm the Director of Social Change Initiative, and we're based in Belfast in Northern Ireland. And one of the key goals of our work is to improve the effectiveness of activism for social change. And one of the best ways we feel you can do that is creating time and space for activists to come together and listen and learn. And so this is a perfect opportunity today, and we're delighted to have such an amazing panel of expertise to share with people. And I'm delighted that Jada Hebra from SNHU is going to facilitate the conversation. She's joined by Lauren from March for Our Lives, and by Ramla Sahid from the Partnership for the Advancement of New Americans, and then by Dolores Huerta. And Dolores needs, I think, no introduction, and we are delighted that this panel of people who have so much to share with us have been able to make the time to do that today from 3 very different campaigns and perspectives. We think that it should be a very rich conversation. Before we move to the conversation, we wanted really to acknowledge the lifetime work and achievement of Dolores. And so I'm going to call on Priscilla Lee, one of the advisors to the Global Citizen Circle, to present the award. This award was most recently presented to Archbishop Desmond and Leah Tutu in South Africa. Previous recipients have included Nelson Mandela, Mary Robinson, and a range of people who I won't go into, but absolutely delighted to hand this over now to Priscilla, just to do this before Jada takes us into the conversation.
Thank you. Welcome to Boston, Dolores. You've worked for the rights, humanity, and dignity of all people. You have stepped up and worked tirelessly for changes that you believed you might not live to see. This room overflows with people who've been inspired by you and who have impacted millions of lives, locally, nationally, and globally. Like you, by doing what they do in their ordinary, everyday lives. Please accept this activist bowl for Dolores Huerta, a vessel from our hearts imbued with lessons learned from you, and later this evening, to be filled with pledges for future activism with your spirit within us. We thank you from the depths of our heart for your vision, your model, and your service. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Oh, this is beautiful. Oh wow. That's gorgeous. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Oh, well, I'm mic'd. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. What an honor it is to be here and witness that. I'm kind of afraid to look over there because I'm fangirling a little bit. It's such an honor to be in your presence, and both of you. Such an honor to have been asked to really be a midwife to this moment and this conversation I'm facilitating and bringing forth, not just all of the wonderful things that you have to share with us and the lessons learned, but from the audience too. And so I love circles. Circles have been serving people for millennia, and I love the whole concept of a circle. And we're sort of in a circle, sort of a semicircle, so I think it will flow. And in that spirit, I just want to say, I know we're on Twitter and we're live. Hello, everybody. That's great. And I don't want to, betray my age, but I do want to say, that if we can try to really be present here in this moment, in this semicircle, in this circle, to witness what we have here, it's such a gift. And we can tweet, and I know that that's really an important function in our modern day, but maybe just as you're about to tweet, if you're in the moment and you think, I have to tweet this or I have to text this, just kind of sit with it for 30 seconds and just marinate on it a little bit and say, what do I think about this? Or maybe even 30 minutes, and then tweet it out. Just try to be present, that's all I ask. So, and I get to ask this because I'm the moderator. So I have this privilege of being a moderator, and again, thank you for having me. And I'm going to use this privilege to really start with you, Dolores, and give you the floor. Each of our discussion leaders, I'm going to ask the same question and ask them to speak their truth to us. And so the question really is for you, Dolores, to think about, if you can think back in your life, can you tell us about a moment when you were so challenged by something that you were just ready to give up, that you just said, you know what, can't do it, I'm done. Let somebody else do it, I'm done. And I think we've all felt that, especially recently. What happened? How did you push through? What did you call on? What did you call in to help you in that moment?
It's kind of interesting. I'm going to mention this not as a commercial, but just kind of to let people know. Carlos Santana, the musician, recently, a couple of years ago, did a documentary about my life. The documentary is called Dolores, okay? And it's on the Independent Lens on public television. And the reason I mention that is because when I saw that documentary, it kind of was like, it was like a flashback, going back to my own life and reflecting on how it was that I became an activist. And it was rather interesting because I had kind of a middle-class upbringing. My mother was a businesswoman. And I did a lot of stuff in public. You know, I played the violin, I played the piano, I did dancing, folklorico, ballet, et cetera, et cetera. So I had a lot of public presence. I was a Girl Scout for 10 years of my life, from the time I was 8 to the time I was 18 years old. And by the way, I think over 60% of the women in the Congress were Girl Scouts, okay? Girl Scouts. And so then I went to college, you know, but it was kind of interesting that when we first organized a community group called the Community Service Organization, and they asked for volunteers to do voter registration, and some people could volunteer to register voters, some people could volunteer to knock on doors, to be bird dogs, right? To find out where people were not registered. I did not think that I had the capacity to be a deputy registrar. I mean, you know, and I look back on that, then of course going canvassing, going door to door gave me a lot of courage. So I really tell people, please go door to door, okay? Go canvassing, especially to get voters out. But then something happened, and the gentleman that organized myself and Cesar Chavez, his name was Fred Ross Sr. And we had an incident where a man came to our office who was paralyzed. He had a stroke in the fields, a farm worker, and he went down to the welfare office to apply for assistance for his family. And they denied him. They would not even let him make an application. And I remember going back to the office and saying to Mr. Ross, what happened? They wouldn't even let him make an application. And Mr. Ross said this to me, and I remember it very clearly. He said to me, you go back down to that office and you demand to see a supervisor. And he didn't say, I'm going to go with you. He didn't say, I'm going to call them ahead of time to let them know you're coming. He said, you go down there. And I thought to myself, I can do that? You know? And so I did. And of course, once I went down there and demanded to see a supervisor, they let the man make an application. Then we found out that they had been doing this to a lot of families of color. Latinos and African-American families, not even letting them make an application to begin with. So to me, that was an empowerment moment. And prior to that, also then when I went to go work eventually we left that organization to start the United Farm Workers. And when I went down there to work with farm workers, then I thought, again, I had all this self-doubt. And I think this is what holds us back a lot. Because we don't think we have the capacity or the skills, even if we want to help people. And in CSO, I did a lot of service work. You know, we help people out with immigration, police issues, school issues, et cetera. And Caesar used to write to me and say, you're doing too many services, you've got to organize people. So what happened when I went to, when we started the union, it was a whole different thing. It wasn't helping people. It was empowering people. You know, it was making them stand up for themselves. And that was like a whole different dynamic, you know. And I remember, again, filled with self-doubt, I thought, well, gee, I guess the best thing I can offer is that I can type and run an adding machine. And then Caesar said this to me, which was really very important. He said, remember this, if people, because I said to him, I'm not really sure that I'm going to be able to help people, you know, get them to empower them. And he said, remember this, if they could have done it without you, it would have already happened. If they could have done it without you, it would have already happened. So I think that basically a lot of us, that's what holds us back, is again, we have this self-doubt, and then of course we don't know. But the other thing I learned in my journey of activism is that you don't have to know everything. You know, number one, you can always ask people to help you. People that know. When I was put in charge of negotiations for United Farm Workers, okay, I went up to some of my labor friends and said, how do you negotiate a contract? I had no clue, no idea. So they gave me some good tips along Sherman's Union, which had a very strong contract, and they said number one, they said, don't let attorneys negotiate. It's always got to be the workers themselves that do it. And then when I was put in charge of legislation, again for the community service organization, we passed some really significant laws. We passed laws that you could register voters door to door, that anybody who's a citizen can register another citizen. Now that might, I don't hear in Massachusetts say, no big deal. In Texas, people cannot register to vote to this date. People have to find a deputy registrar, and the deputy has to be re-deputized every single year. They can't vote absentee ballots, you know? So if you want to know what's wrong with Texas, that's what's wrong. They're like 50 years behind the time in terms of being able to register people to vote. So we passed that law. We passed another law that if you were an immigrant, a legal immigrant to the United States of America, you could get public assistance. Prior to that, you couldn't in California. You had to be a U.S. citizen to get aid to the blind, aid to needy children, etc. So that law was very, very significant because today there are millions of people who are legal immigrants to this country that can get public assistance, okay? So we passed laws that you could vote in the Spanish language, you know, disability insurance for farm workers. So when I went to Sacramento to start passing these laws and came to the U.S. Congress, I didn't know how you pass a law, but I asked people, right? So I think to sum it all up, the main thing that we need to do is kind of ignore the self-doubt that all of us have. You know, ask for help to know how to do things, knowing that we don't have the capacity. And the other thing is when you organize people, they give you the answers. The answers come from the people themselves, you know? And so we don't have to be afraid to go out there and start doing social justice work just because we don't have the answers. You know, and then also in the doing, that's where the learning comes. And even in organizing people, by getting them to volunteer to do the work, that's how they become leaders. Because many of them don't know that they have that leadership capacity. So it's just a matter of, you know, ignoring the self-doubt, having faith in yourself, having faith in the people that you're trying to organize, because you know that they're going to be our teachers in the long run, and then taking risks. So when I left my hometown and quit my job as a teacher and to become an organizer to go help farm workers, I was in the middle of a divorce. I had at that time 5 children, okay? And going to Delano to organize farm workers, not knowing where my next meal was going to be coming from, you know. I left a couple of my small children with cousins for them to take care of, and then went down there and said, just acting on faith. So I think you have to also be willing to take risks, okay? Now, I have never regretted, of course, to this moment that I took that risk, even though all of my family thought I was crazy. You know, it's like running away to join the circus, you know? And jeopardizing my children, they thought. Luckily, my kids all turned out pretty good, okay? My oldest son is a doctor. He's an MD. My other son, Emilio, is an attorney. I have a daughter who's a teacher. My other daughter's an oncology nurse. I could go on and on, okay? So anyway, so I think those are the kind of the ingredients and the elements that we need to do the social justice work, and to try to go out there and remove the apathy that people feel, you know, because they feel, I can't do this, or I don't have the time, you know, I've got a lot of work, I'm in school, I have too many classes, but somehow, if we really want to work for social justice, we have to make the time. You know, we have to make the time, we have to make those choices, and at this critical moment in our history of the United States of America, I think it's a call to action for all of us, okay? That we have to make the time and see separate. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ramla, how about you?
Everything she just said.
Everything she said.
You know, I think every single day we all, or especially me, I wake up and I'm just like, there's no way we can do this. I think that the self-doubt is always there. But the way that I combat it, and the way that I find myself sort of overcoming that challenge, is the hope that I see in the people that we serve and the people that we build with, right? And that, just reflecting a little bit on post-Trump a little bit, I was coming out of this experience of having been an organizer for several years, winning a campaign, looking at California as sort of a trailblazer, seeing all the opportunities that exist to expand rights and protections for people, and what it means to go from my organizing sphere to sort of into a space where I am intentionally organizing people from my community, meaning Muslim women, refugees, people from the Middle East and Africa, and thinking about how we make them more visible in our community, right? Because we resettle refugees, and then we promptly, we forget that their voices are also needed in policy tables, in decision making, and that they have, lots of experience to come to the table about what is wrong, right, in the systems that should be serving them better, should be setting them up for success, why that's not happening, and solutions for how to make that better, right? And so wanting to build with that community, seeing the hope that exists there, and then Trump getting elected, right? And then all of a sudden, it's just like, this country's hopeless. Just feeling overwhelmed, right? Because that day, we were door knocking, we were, helping interpret for people at the polls, making sure people who were turned away could vote. And so lots and lots of hope leading up to that moment. And then, not ever considering that Trump was a reality. And once, I got that call from one of my board members that he'd been elected, just completely breaking down and saying, and thinking to myself, like, there's no way, right? And the next day, we led a circle. We had a conversation with several of our members, with our communities, and we talked a lot about what it means to move forward, to go from here. What do we do, and how do we shift? And that shift for us was rapid response. What does it mean to protect people? How do we get legal defense and resources and workshops in place so people weren't, unnecessarily afraid, and that they were connected to resources and supports. And I walked away from the first 7 days, I want to say, post the election, feeling hopeful again, right? And the reason is people, the realization that people survive, people are resilient, people have especially the people we're serving and building with. My parents, my family's history is one of survival. They've survived civil wars, they've survived refugee camps, they've survived poverty and City Heights, which is the community I come from, which is 6.5 square miles of a very difficult community to walk that didn't, for a long time have even a full-service grocery store, right? So that there's hope in people that they know how to survive and they know how to protect each other. And it's really leading into that resilience, it's really leading into that struggle, right? That I found hope, and that we need organizations. We need to invest in power building, and we need to invest in the capacity of people who know very much what is wrong and what to do about it, right? And that it just requires the investment and the support and the space, creating the space for people to think together and for people to build. And I grew up so I grew up in City Heights, again, that's 6.5 square miles. In the city of San Diego, this is the community where refugees were resettled. So the first wave of refugees were from Vietnam and Cambodia, and then in the later 80s and 90s, we had seen waves of refugees coming in from East Africa, right? So this is a refugee community. This is a poor neighborhood. This is a community that the city itself had neglected for many, many, many years. And it wasn't until business owners sort of organized and bought a billboard and said, "Welcome to City Heights, the crime capital of San Diego," that it started to generate attention, right? And that philanthropy started to pay attention to this community and wanting to take action. in that activism, and I was growing up during that time, I remember my mother taking me to school board meetings, to community meetings, talking about the community, talking about and not only the education systems, but what does redevelopment and revitalization look like in City Heights, and what do community members have to say about it? And again, these are community members who don't own any part of the land, right? But demanding space in the process to have a say in what happens in their community, and owning their community, and demanding that, you know, developers didn't just come in, or the city didn't just come in and sort of displace people and make it whatever it was. Some of that still happened, yes, but it was in the organizing that I saw with my mom, and folks like my mom who said, no way, like, we live here, we deserve dignity and justice, and we have a voice and something to say about it. I think that really woke me up in my younger years to understand what it means to build power, even when you feel like you don't have any, when you don't feel like you have a say, or you don't feel like you know, people will hear you because you don't speak the language, because you're not a voter, because you don't own any part of the land, or whatever reason that, you know, we dismiss people, that despite those challenges, that people can stand up, that can demand space, and ensure that their voice is heard regardless. And so growing up in that space with elders like elders in the community and people like my mom teaching me that, and then growing up to sort of trying to organize in my high school, right? And thinking about what does it mean to have a say in my school environment, to have others have a say in the school environment, and our curriculum, all of those experiences, right, have really taught me to remain hopeful, and like Dolores said, have faith in people, right, and have faith that they're the best experts, right, in their own lived experience and the solutions needed to sort of demand justice. And if only we, you know, relied on that, and if we leaned into those experiences and centered those voices, that we could really achieve what we all really want, which is a transformed society and liberation for all of us, right? Again, that only happens though if we continue to have faith in people. And so I find my own kind of hope, you know, in that space of like just remembering what it took for someone like my mom to survive, right? To come to a new country, to not know the language, but to sort of to demand space when other people thought she didn't deserve it or didn't need it, or maybe that she didn't really understand what was going on, right? That she really stood up and became that model for me, and that model really sets people up like me to sort of grow up in a world where we feel like maybe things are impossible, right? Systems things keep happening, and systems keep weighing down on us, but that despite that, people have learned, you know, to survive, and they will continue to survive. And it's our job to continue to lean into that challenge and making sure that we are always demanding full justice. And justice can only be served if those most impacted are at the center of that. So I think I find my hope in that, which is, you know, our history, and we will always survive.
So much to say, but your turn.
No pressure, right?
No pressure.
So I guess I'll start off. I was a Girl Scout. That's something.
Yeah, there you go.
Where to start? Okay. So I'm asked a lot about how I chose to become an activist and everything like that. And I really think for a lot of people, it's not that they chose to be an activist, it's that they had to become for their own survival and for their friends' survival. And for me, that really, survival was really quite literal in my circumstance. So my first experience really with gun violence was when I was 9 years old, and I lived in Los Angeles, California, and it was this one day where I was just being a happy-go-lucky 9-year-old like we all deserve to have the chance to be. And my mom, who at the time was a teacher at my school, pulled me out of my classroom and told me that my dad was in the midst of a shooting at LAX, Los Angeles International Airport. And the look in my mother's eyes that day of me being a 9-year-old was something I've never seen before, because I've been fortunate enough to not have to deal with gun violence every single day in my life. But I remember the one thing that she told me was to make sure I didn't tell anybody in the classroom, because she didn't want me to worry any other child whose parent might have been working also at the airport. So I remember sitting in that class that day and just being completely silent. I don't think I said a single word for the rest of the day. And I just remember being so frustrated. So thank God I came home that day and my father was okay. But I just remember that sense of silence, right? That sense of silence was something that I've hated, probably because I like to talk a lot. But from that moment is really when I began to really dislike the sense of having to be silent, to be quiet about issues. But okay, flash forward 4 years later. This was last year, February 14th, 2018. I now live in Florida. I was sitting in my classroom and the fire alarm went off. So we were excited because we're like, okay, it's a fire alarm drill. We get to go home early, whatever. So we went downstairs and then we began to hear gunshots. And the moment that really everything kicked in for me was when I saw people running. And remember, it was Valentine's Day, so I saw people, my friends, my classmates, running with roses and teddy bears, and a day that was supposed to be filled with so much love, in a flash turned into the day filled with the most hate I've ever seen. So I went back to my classroom. We ran back, practically tumbling over each other to get back to the classroom and to hide in the corner. And once again, I was surrounded by that silence. And that silence was a barrier for me. It was really a barrier in trying to survive, right? And I remember just sitting there wanting to scream. So I sat there in my classroom in the silence, and we watched on my friend's phone that was muted a helicopter footage over my school. And then soon enough, unfortunately, we began to get texts and messages from my friends who were in the building where the shooting was happening. And the worst was actually the videos. I saw videos of my good friends, my classmates, our teachers bleeding out on the floor. And to be silent while watching something so horrific is the worst feeling you could ever imagine. So the moment that I got out of school that day, everything seemed silent still. Even though nobody had to be silent anymore, and no words could describe how we were feeling at that moment. It's almost as if it didn't happen, even though we were in it when it was happening. So when I got home that day, my mother and father went to go check on my brother, who was also in the school at the time. And while they went to go check on him, I turned on the TV in my home. And they were in the other room because they probably wouldn't have let me have done this. But I turned on the TV, and it was some news network, and it was footage of my school. And all of a sudden, it was my friends' faces on the TV. And they were declared missing at the time, but I knew. I saw the videos, I saw the images, I knew they weren't missing. And at that moment, it's almost as if the silence that I've had to deal with both times in my experiences with gun violence and having loved ones in gun violence and being in circumstances of gun violence and myself being in the shooting, it's like all that silence channeled itself into this one outrageous scream. And I ask you guys sometimes, make sure you scream. It really helps me. Not in public. I mean, I don't want you to worry anybody. But it's almost as if all the silence came out in that one scream. And I knew from that moment on that I never wanted to be silent again, because my silence, it felt as though was the reason that this happened to my school. It felt as though that my silence, since I was 9 years old, was the reason that this happened at my school, in my city, to my friends. And I knew that I couldn't let that go on any longer. So starting the next day, I was anything but silent. I just started talking to every single newscaster I could find, every single camera I could find to speak out on this issue, because when I saw my friends' faces on the TV the day that I got home from school, I thought about growing up, and I've grown up in a time where I was literally born after Columbine, and I've seen Sandy Hook happen and all these other mass shootings happen, and even local shootings where there's people's faces, but it's almost human to think of them as characters and not as people, because it's almost too much of an emotional burden on ourselves to think that this is something that happens in the United States. So I started speaking out, and soon enough, me and 15 other, I think it was, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas students, my high school, were sitting on our friend's living room floor, and we decided to have a march in DC protesting against this type of violence. And we thought we would have like 200 people there, right? We thought it was just gonna be like our school. We're like, do you think the student government kids will come? And it was this whole thing. But luckily, with the use of social media, if you have kids, you yell at your kids for being on their phones too much. That's what really helped us start this movement, was being on our phones too much. I'm not kidding, yes. So using those tools that we've had, we brought together a nation somehow. It's almost like a blur in my mind. It was really going on the news and just hundreds of phone calls and working until we literally fell asleep in a mass group on the floor of organizing in my friend's house in his living room. We somehow organized the largest demonstration against gun violence the United States has ever seen in DC. But I think the real thing that was my biggest barrier was myself, like you guys were saying. Sometimes it is yourself that is the biggest barrier, and thinking, I don't know how to do this. Just remember, if you ever think you don't have the power or the knowledge to do something in regards to social justice, I was 14. So I didn't even take an American history class at a high school level when I did this. So don't let that hold you back. Yeah, I think just overall, I think in a time, in a nation where silence is almost the status quo, speaking out on any issue that you care about is really in itself an act of rebellion, an act of resilience. So I just ask of you, please go out and actually speak on issues that you care about and never let that silence impede yourself as a being, and just continue forward.
I have a question for you, Dolores. But before I ask you, what I keep hearing is powerlessness, silence, and I just wonder, how do we define power in our culture, in our society right now? Because what I see is a lot of power here, and yet these are folks who were told, where do we get those messages that you are powerless or you are small? And the work of overcoming that in order to find your voice and to find your power in extreme circumstances, each of you, extreme circumstances where you didn't have a choice. You said, I'm not choosing this, I have to do this. Then you find your power, then you find your voice, then you overcome that sense of vulnerability. I just wonder, and this leads into my question to you, Dolores, is in a time when, while we can see so many critical things happening, where we all should be moved because we are in such extreme circumstances, not everyone sees it that way, and there's a ton of apathy. There's not a sense of urgency, at least the level of urgency that I think that we should be witnessing. There's this eerie silence, and this sort of sense of, I don't have any power because I'm just one person, and actually things might not be that bad. So Dolores, as you think about your journey, and as you listen to these stories today, what can you teach us? What lesson did you learn along the way to move people? Whether it was politicians, moving people for political action, moving people to go door to door, who might not have felt the same sense of urgency that you felt, that critical, push, but who might need to maybe have some awareness before they feel that urgency, so that they can overcome that sense of powerlessness and do something. So I think a lot about how we define power, who is powerful and who is courageous, because I think the people who are most resilient and most oppressed are actually the most powerful and courageous. But how do we flip it? And how do we get people to push through that sense of apathy to act in a time when we aren't acting enough?
Yeah, I mentioned the name of, I call him the godfather of the Mexican-American Chicano movement, who happened to be an Anglo, and that was Fred Ross Sr. And he taught us this organizing method of what we call house meetings, where we have a meeting in somebody's home. And it can be 4 to 6 people, that's kind of the ideal, maybe 8 at the most. But then tell people about, we demonstrate to people, number one, to convince them that they have power and that they don't need somebody to come in and solve their issues for them. And we say to them, the power is in your person. This is all the power that you need. It's in your person, but you can't do it by yourself. You've got to have other people join you. You've got to form a group. You've got to form an organization to make this happen. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And the other thing is that you have to be responsible, because if you do not join in, if you do not take action to solve your particular issue, it's never going to get solved. You know, so you've got to understand that you're the one that has to step up and do whatever, volunteer to do whatever it takes to solve this issue. And if you don't, it's not going to change. It'll never change. So it's up to you. You've got to take responsibility, but understand that you have the power to do this. And then what we do, like, I left the Farmers Union about 17 years ago, and I went back to grassroots organizing like we did before, and the Dolores Huerta Foundation. And when we tell people that they have power, and then they start, you know, volunteering to do these different things. I can give an example. Just one family who was concerned because they didn't have a fence around their school in a farm area. One of the children walked away, so they passed petitions. But not only did they get the fence for the school, they got filters for their water, because a lot of the water in California is poisoned with pesticides, but they got a brand new gymnasium built at this school. And they are the ones that got the petitions, they registered the voters, they passed the bond issue. And not only that, but then one of the women who was involved in this decided to run for school board. And now she's got a majority on the school board, and then she ran for a water board also, and she's got a majority on the water board also, and cleaning up the corruption. This is just one farm worker woman, an immigrant who speaks very broken English, but she has all the meanings translated into Spanish. But I wanted to address this issue of the gun violence, because I think I recently saw this comedian, and he's Arab, and I'm sorry I don't remember his name, but he had this whole presentation about gun violence, and people are saying, why are all these immigrants coming to our borders from Guatemala, El Salvador, you know, and Honduras, because of gun violence? Because, and interesting, and this I didn't know, in Mexico, there is only one gun store. One gun store. So 70% of all of the guns that are in Mexico are from where? Here, the United States of America. And the NRA has got this, you know, global arms sales of guns, and they have sold guns, of course, to all these Central American countries. So when people tell us that they are escaping gun violence, it's true, because tens of thousands of people in the Central American countries have been killed by gun violence, okay? So when we talk about the threat of gun violence at the global level, this is it. The NRA is doing this. And this is creating all of these people that are coming to the border. We know that people over there were poor, and I always like to mention the word bananas, okay? And I say that because every time that we eat a banana, we think that the money goes to the people in Guatemala or these Central American countries. It doesn't. It goes to American corporations like Chiquita Banana or Dole or the 50 Banana Companies. But that poverty has been there for a long time. But the difference now is that the guns that are being shipped and sold in those countries is creating this reign of terror that is causing these families to come to our borders in the United States of America. And just one little thing to add to that, this year in October will be the 150th anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi's birthday. And so I'm saying that because I think for all of our organizations, if we can reflect on that and on Dr. Martin Luther King and on Cesar Chavez, you know, who fasted 25 days twice, 36 days once for nonviolence, okay? So we can all remember this and take it to our organization and maybe do some kind of commemoration on nonviolence, and then also to remember the violence from guns, including the death of our president, John Kennedy, Senator Robert Kennedy, and in our movement, the farm workers movement, we had five people that were killed with gun violence. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I really want to open this up to the audience in true circle form so that everyone can participate. Again, the theme of our program is building movements for change. And what I'm hearing again is the power of one, overcoming your own barriers and your own internal negative voices. But would love to hear your questions and your comments. In the interest, and Peggy McIntosh, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Peggy McIntosh, but she often says, when you limit people's time when they speak, and in Circle we often have to limit people's time when they speak, she calls it the autocratic use of time for democratic purposes. So while I would love to have each one of you go on and really share, we do have to limit you to about 2 minutes to ask a question or make a comment, and then we'll give about 2 minutes for our panelists to respond, just so that we can make sure that everyone who wants to say something can say something. So we have volunteers with microphones. If you could just raise your hand, stand up if you can, and state your name and your affiliation and your question and your comment, that would be wonderful, and we can begin the discussion. But before we do that, and I just want to thank our lovely speakers again, because powerful stuff there. Thank you. Who wants to start? Yes, thank you. Can you just say your name and your affiliation, and I will start my timer. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I promise. Hi, my name is Kaya Ramanpur. I came in from Western New Hampshire, Southern New Hampshire this afternoon. I'm really honored to be here, so thank you for sharing all of your wisdom with us today. My question is a little bit about, I guess, the themes that help cultivate social movements. So I speak on my own activism, which sometimes is cultivated from my anger or frustration at the world or my own experience, and it feels like being under siege all the time is really exhausting. I'm sure a lot of us feel that way too. And so my question is, where does love, empathy, and vulnerability fit in with these movements? And how do we grasp that and cultivate that instead of perhaps our anger? Is there a place for that? Is my question.
It's a beautiful question. The floor is yours. Who wants to take it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we are living in times that are exceptionally challenging, but remembering that, we have a history of doing bad things. And our folks have found a way to survive all that, right? And remembering that the way they survived was not sitting in that anger, right? It's seeing possibilities and having a vision for the kind of world we want to sort of birth or bring into existence. And it's that vision, it's one, being very crystal clear about what it is that we're doing, what values are we leading with, and they're not values of anger and destruction, but they're values of love, empathy, and compassion, and love for humanity, and wanting things to be better for all people. And so being clear about what those values are, and building with people that, are clear about that, and clear about what they're building and who they're building with. And so in my organization, for example, at PANA, the Partnership for the Advancement of New Americans, we take a lot of our lessons from the farm worker movement, right? So biennially, we do a house meeting model in which we actually train what we call Indigenous leaders. When we say Indigenous, no, we're not talking about our Indigenous brothers and sisters that we stole this land from, but Indigenous leaders in that they're people who are in our network, in our communities, who are leading other people, and are not necessarily doing that at a formal job, at a social service organization or anything, but they're just people that have incredible trust. And people go to them naturally to seek advice, to seek support from, and they're people who are already showing up for their village, for their people. And so it's identifying those people we train them in community organizing theory and tools and how to facilitate meetings, and then we release them into the community to lead a series of house meetings. And in these house meetings, we're very intentional about how we lead the conversation. And one is from we choose different topics: health, housing, jobs, education, the different issues that refugees and community members in City Heights are really faced with. On that particular topic, what is the issue, that they themselves are facing and their families? How is that related to community? And then what is our responsibility, right, for public action and public leadership? And if we can get people to sort of have that conversation, then we can go back and actually invite them to intentional meetings where we're talking about, okay, then let's think about how we move into action, together. The way we do that too is we sort of collect all of the conversations. We have a researcher who, does a phenomenal job of bringing up those themes. We report back to our community, our village, and we say, these are things that came up across the culture groups because we are a multiracial organizing hub. We're organizing within 5 or 6 different languages. And we ask them, very intentionally, we say, we can't address everything. We have to be realistic, right? We can't address everything. But what is the one thing that we can take action on together, we feel strongly enough about, right, to take action on, that would help us move on some of these other issues, so we could make we can make movement. Once we pick that priority, then it's about relationship building among the people. So we have to be grounded in authentic relationships. We have to lead with authentic demand, meaning the organizer just doesn't, choose the strategies and tactics, meaning the community has to be involved in that process of choosing their own strategies, of debriefing. We have to let people to reflect on the actions that they've taken and what they've learned from that, right? What feelings are they sitting with? Making time for each other between the individuals who are organizing, so they're checking in with each other, but the organizer's job is also to build its leaders, so sitting with leaders, giving critical feedback from a place of love, right? And making that a part of our culture of how we move together and how we do this work. And also being very clear, again, about not only choosing values and not forgetting about them, but bringing them up in front of the group and reminding them consistently about why we chose this issue, what progress we've made, and sort of how are we moving together, and do these values still make sense, right? And so that's a really, really important thing, because that's the stuff that sustains you and sustains movement work and keeps people in it. And we have to be very clear, too, that people get burned out. And we have to give people space to check in with themselves, right? And maybe they don't come to the next 2 meetings, and that's okay, right? But that they have a space to come back into. And if we're noticing that more of our people are not coming back for the second meeting, then we're checking ourselves. What is in our circle, what's in our space that's making people sort of not come back, or burning people out? Maybe we're demanding too much or putting too much work on people. So it's a delicate balance, and it's a continuous reflective process, both within your team, but team being along with the communities you're building with, and yourself, doing that work yourself. Because we have to take care of people if we want them to last and be sustained in this movement work and be at Dolores,
I think that's a great question. To kind of do the work that we do with love, and I think that really means recognizing the other person's humanity, and also creatures of God or the universe, whatever faith we believe in. But there's a couple of simple things that I like to share with people. And just to remind people that we are one human family. I don't like the word racism because I think really the word is we belong to different ethnic groups. We belong to different cultures. We belong to different nationalities. But we are only one human race, Homo sapiens. One human race. We don't have a lot of different human races. We have one human race. And then I like to remind people where our human race began. Our human race began in Africa. What does that mean? That means that we are all Africans, okay? We are all Africans of different shades and colors. And so we can say to the KKK and the white nationalists and the neo-Nazis, get over it, you're Africans, okay? And I think that we have to repeat that. You know, we have like a different ethnic group, right? But one human race. So that means if we are one human race, then that means that we have to support each other and we have to take care of each other. And this is the only way that our human race survived on this planet, because we are the weakest of all of the animals, you know, and yet we have survived. And the only way that we survived is because we took care and we protected each other. So I think it's important that we start repeating that, and especially put it into our classrooms, you know, starting with pre-K. So that way we can do away with this idea of white supremacy and white privilege. You know, so all the white folk need to know you're Africans, okay? Yeah, to begin with. And then I'm going to just use another quote. When we talk about women's reproductive rights, women's right to abortion, when we talked about gay rights, right? Then there's a word, a slogan from the great president of Mexico, Benito Juarez. And he had the slogan, his saying, that I think every Latino family knows, and I'm going to say it in Spanish: el respeto al derecho ajeno es la paz. In English, that means respecting other people's rights is peace. How many children you want to have? I had 11. But if you don't, my daughter Juanita likes dogs. She doesn't like kids, okay? Only nephews and nieces, okay? But you know, that is a woman's right. That is her human right. Who you want to live with, who you want to marry, if it happens to be somebody of the same sex, that is your human right. And we should not intrude on that. And so respecting other people's rights is peace, okay? Respecting other people's rights is peace. And then respecting, and even when we are dealing with the haters, you know, I would just say this: we don't want to return their hate with more hate. You know, we have to try to return their hate with understanding, and we can pray that their ignorance is somehow removed, right? That they get illuminated, but then we have to try not to reciprocate with hate, you know, because if we do, that just means that the hate grows. And so we've got to make sure that love grows and respect grows and humanity grows. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I know we have to move on, and I don't know if this mic is on. Wait, I think it is. Okay.
Yeah.
On the idea of like hate and love and optimism, pessimism, I just want to say, like, from my experience, March for Our Lives was not born really at the most optimistic time for a lot of us. I mean, it was a day after a lot of us lost our friends, our teachers, and our classmates to gun violence, literally being shot and murdered in the halls where we talk, have conversations, everything else. So I think, if I'm being honest, we were not optimistic. I'm completely honest about that. After what happened to us, we weren't optimistic. We were completely pessimistic. But the difference is that we were productive pessimists. We weren't passive pessimists. So many P words. So I think it's okay to be pessimist. It's okay to have this anger, frustration inside of you, but you have to be productive with it. Because that's the only way that, at least in my experience, anything has been done, is by being a productive pessimist. And also, really fast, I just want to say, like, on the education standpoint, I've been fortunate enough to have an education where I've learned about different amazing activists who created change in their own community. And a good example of this is in my Spanish class a couple of years ago, actually. We had a chapter that was on Cesar Chavez and Dolores. And we learned, like, the word for rights and everything else. But having those people to look up to has really been what I find my love in, is looking to those people to see the boundaries that they transcended. And it's really hard for me to think about that, because I had Spanish with my friend Jamie Guttenberg, who passed away last year at my school, and to think that they also read about people like you and Caesar and Martin Luther King and everything else. It really, I truly believe that if we had more education on these change makers, these monuments in social justice, I truly believe that the world would be a better place.
Amen.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Cathy Hoffman. I'm a nonviolent civil disobedience trainer. And actually, what you said it was part of my question, because I feel like in this country we're given the impression that social justice leaders or activists come out of nowhere. Rosa Parks just sat down on the bus. And people don't know that she was at the Highlander Center, and people don't know about the history. And when I read about Parkland and the curriculum at Parkland, and what you were just talking about, that part of what gave you the words was the quality of the education that you were already learning there. So I was going to ask you to talk about that and sort of what are the circumstances, the organizing experiences that give rise to what sometimes appear like individual, courageous heroes. And the other thing I just wanted to ask is, I notice everyone on the panel seemed to be women. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the ways in which being brilliant women has both informed and supported you, and some of the challenges you may have faced as women in the work.
Wow. Okay. So to start with like the first half of that amazing question, curriculums that allowed for at least me and my friends to be able to be organizers and everything else. I think a lot of it was that, at least in our own March for Our Lives organization, out of co-founders, we're split amongst pretty much like 3 curriculums. 1, theater kids, 2, debate kids, and 3, TV production kids. And I don't want to spend a lot of time saying this, but let's just say like we weren't the most popular kids. I also forgot to say like GSA kids also. So really, each of us really had this almost training to become organizers. I could spend hours talking about this, but like really fast, like I was in TV production last year, and we learned about the news cycle, so we knew how fast stories like mass tragedies or mass shootings or whatever go away. So we used that knowledge to help us go out there literally the next day. Even my brother was there, like the day of the shooting, like right after. Talking to different news agencies. Theater kids know how to present themselves. They know how to talk and convince people without even really knowing the things that they're talking about. Don't worry, now my friends do. And then debate kids know how to wear a suit and act like they know what they're talking about as well. As a debate student, I'm saying that, so don't worry. And I think also like Gay Straight Alliance students. I mean, Emma was literally the president, and then had like 80% of like the co-founders of March for Our Lives are like queer identifying. Because we've been in those circles, we understand empathy for a lot of people, and to not be the ones specifically being the most popular, getting some hate. So it's all those things, those curriculums that really allowed us to spur. Yeah. Sorry for taking so long.
No, stop it. You're good. Good answer?
Yeah, from the mouth of babes comes the wisdom, right?
Yeah, always.
But I also wanted to kind of follow up on something that you said about the curriculum. We have an educational system in the United States of America that is pretty, massive and broad, but we have to change the content. Mm-hmm. We have to change the content of our educational system, because starting again with pre-K and kindergarten, we've got to teach our young people the contributions of people of color in building this country. It is not in our school books that the White House and the Congress were built by African slaves, and when we think of the brutality that the African slaves and Native Americans in our country had to go through. And we've never compensated our Native Americans or the descendants of African slaves for the horrible way that they were treated in the United States of America. And then all of the immigrants that built our country, the people from Mexico, Mr. Trump, people from Mexico, people from Japan, from China, from India, from the Philippines, all of these immigrants that built this country, and that is not taught in our school books, and it needs to be taught. So that our children of color will have the dignity that they deserve, right? And not only that, but we need to teach about the labor movement. You know, how many people know how we got the 8-hour day? What happened to those labor leaders that fought for the 8-hour day? In Chicago, May the 1st, May Day, which we do not celebrate in the United States of America. What happened to those labor leaders? They were executed, they were hung. So all of us, every single day, we go to work and we work an 8-hour day, but we don't even think about the people that fought for that. And the other things that we have from the labor movement, Social Security, disability insurance, unemployment insurance, safety standards, public education. These are things that working people, labor, organized labor fought for. But again, it's not in our school books, right? And so then we have this anti-labor sentiment where labor people are called special interests. Well, if the majority of the people in the United States of America are workers, how can they be a special interest, okay? And I think we have some labor people that just joined us. United Auto Workers in the room. And they are fighting to get their contract at Harvard, okay? So everybody out there in the room, if you can just send the people at Harvard a nice letter, an email, or a telephone call, tell them, sign the contract, okay? Sign the contract. Give these workers the kind of protections that they need, the kind of wages that they need, so that they can also have a good life, like many of the teachers do, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on the second half of your question about all of us appearing to be women? Which was a beautiful way to ask that question. But any thoughts about that?
I mean, only in that women have always been the bedrock of our communities, right? And have usually not gotten the credit that they deserve. And increasingly, I think we're in an era where we're starting to recognize those contributions much more, and we're giving permission for young women particularly to sort of step up into that space and to be leaders and to be supported in that. But I think if I reflect on my own leadership, I think it was all women who really inspired me to step up into the scene, right? And to sort of be a part of something greater than myself, right? Starting with my mom, but then all of my mentors have been women from my workplace, right? Like the women who sort of said, you can't quit, you know, even when I wanted to quit, and said, no, let's figure out how we work with you to create a space where you can feel fulfilled and most proud of the work that you're doing. And so I think mentorship is something that we talk about, but in practice, I think it's beyond just like a external person that you check in once every 6 weeks. I think it's in all of the interactions we have with young women. You know, how are we supporting them and providing them space and permission to sort of check in, to create opportunities where they can step in, because most of our young women don't know that they can be brilliant. They are brilliant, and giving them. Being intentional about how we invite them in, I think, has been something that I think at PANAS, particularly where I work, we're thinking a lot about, especially when working with women who are young Muslim Black women who are wearing hijab, and then we're expecting them to go door knock in places like El Cajon City, where Duncan Hunter is their congressman, right? One, preparing them for the kind of conversations they might have, but also giving them permission that they can do that and they should, and that they're powerful. So I just want to say that, we have, our movement work has always been built on the labor of women, and we haven't always been credited, but it's great to see people like Dolores being honored and monuments like Dolores being celebrated, because we just don't do enough of that. And it's really in reflective leadership, right? That people find permission for themselves, give themselves permission. If they can find mentors and folks that they can relate with, that I think it just gives permission for people to say, well, I can too. And so in women leadership, like, we just need to do more to celebrate that. But also, I think one thing that we can improve on is figuring out how we also have representation in the kind of leaders that we're choosing.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Ooh, 1, 2, 3.
Hi, Pam Boutsalis, Southern New Hampshire University in Manchester, New Hampshire. I've always believed we all have something extraordinary to share, to offer others. And I'm wondering for each of you, what personal trait has become a great strength for you in what you're trying to achieve?
Okay. Okay, two. I'm thinking of two. I feel like obnoxious when I'm trying to think about like good traits. So one, this is one that at least because a lot of the activism that I do, or all activism, deals with a lot of heavy topics, especially when every single day, every single weekend, because I'm still in school, I go to communities like my friends on the south, work with my friends on the south side of Chicago or in the Bronx that deal with this every single day. A trait that is looked over a lot in activism, I think, or by the external world, is comedic relief. So honestly, there's been days where the only thing that has gotten me through the day has really been like comedic relief. And not like inappropriate comedic relief, but like respectful, like just funny things. And I mean, like, I'm usually with fellow young people, so there's a lot of jokes that we have. Yes. And then secondly, let me think. I think really just like being able to talk to people is the best trait that I've had. I've been in a lot of circumstances growing up where I've had, like, most of my friends were adults just because like that's how it was, and I was always that little girl that wanted to talk about like water crisis like in Flint, or like immigration rights. Like I've always been that like second grader that like did a presentation on like environmental like racism and stuff like that, that like other kids are like, how could a plant be racist? And I'm like, that's not how it works. So like honestly, I think comedic relief and just being able to talk to other people is like what's helped me the most.
That's excellent. Others, do you have personal strengths?
Yes, and the one trait I would add to that is not seeing barriers or impossibility, right? That these institutions were created by people and they can be undone by people. And just if you have that frame going in, so much can be accomplished.
That's beautiful.
Well, I think that when we're working again for social justice, which is mainly trying to solve issues or trying to help other people, that I think that kind of gives you the energy that you need. And I like what you said before about turning anger into a positive energy. And I know right now a lot of us are really angry. But again, if we don't do something, if we don't take some kind of an action, then that anger just stays with us. So we've got to really think. And you know, I saw Michael Moore on Broadway. Somebody got us tickets, okay? But he said something really that just stuck with me. And he said, each one of us, when we wake up in the morning, what do? We wash our face, we brush our teeth, and call our congressman, okay? You know? So if we can remember that, because I know, like, you probably have a lot of issues at the state legislature. We know there's a bill in the Congress to stop voter suppression, which we know is happening all over the country. I think it's H.R. 1. So call our congressman. And I know that you people here are blessed here in this part of the nation, because you have such great representatives. But you all probably have relatives in the Midwest or in the South.
In Florida.
Florida. Yeah, that you can call and ask them to do the same thing, you know. And so kind of get them to become activists. Because I think being an activist is one thing, but if the main thing that we as activists have to do is recruit other people, okay? Yeah. And you know, take some of the things that we've talked about here today and transfer it to other people, and then get them involved. Because again, most of the people think, you know, I can't do it. And you know, Helen Keller said, and I'm not going to quote her exactly, but she said that the greatest evil that scientists have not been able to find a cure for in human beings is apathy. Okay, it's apathy. So if somehow we can reach out to people and say, yeah, you know, send that email, pick up that telephone, you know, call your congressperson, because we have these measures, or talk about against the gun violence, talk about supporting immigrants, you know, it's long time since the United States we have had an amnesty for immigrants. And when people say, amnesty, why that? This has always been the policy of the United States of America from day one as a nation of immigrants. Every group of immigrants that came to this country received their residency and their citizenship. So it's nothing new, what we're doing right now. You know, it's nothing new. So pick up, like just have somebody pick up the phone, or whatever issue that there is. Right now, the whole thing about the abortion rights that is happening right now, where women are going to die when their rights to abortion are taken away from them. So we have all of these issues. Climate change, there's no lack of issues right now. No, there is a lack of activism on people to take action.
Thank you. In the back.
Good evening. My name is Queen Babazi, and I'm from Uganda, a fresh immigrant in the US. I actually made my first year anniversary today. So, thank you. I've been an activist for some good years, and I've had the advantage of experiencing my activism in different spaces. And my question is around, it's more of an internal reflect, something that I've noticed that happens in activism spaces, whereby we have fellow activists or individuals or organizations pulling each other down. I've seen so many activists and organizations just erase or get off board simply because it's our own internal fights. So I just simply want to know how you manage to, mitigate such an environment, because it is so draining and heartbreaking to know that, we are few that are really trying to bring all this social justice to work, and then we are also putting our own people down and just tearing each other down. Thank you.
That's a great question.
Okay, so that question was really excellent, and I can tell that you are an activist from just that question. So from the gun violence prevention perspective, I've had a lot of experience with organizations almost trying to compete, right? So there's so many different big organizations that you probably know. There's Everytown, there's Giffords, there's Brady, there's March for Our Lives, there's everything else. And March for Our Lives, as I said like 100 times today, was founded by people who experience gun violence, right? And as we've broadened, as we've reached out to other communities and have people, like I said before, in the Bronx, South Side, South Central LA, good friends of mine now that have experienced gun violence themselves, it's almost heartbreaking to see other organizations that themselves weren't founded by people who have experienced this type of violence that are trying to compete with us. And the idea that they're trying to compete over this issue, over gun violence, by trying to get money, trying to get funding because they feel as though they need their name to be at the top of recognition, is really genuinely disgusting to me. It almost breaks my heart. I remember actually right after the shooting at my school, I'm not gonna name them, but this one organization that I now work alongside them in the gun violence community, they sent out one of their local chapter leaders to come to my school and try and find a student to just speak for them, to get funding. And as somebody that just experienced a shooting and learning this months later after having our march, I just couldn't believe that. And unfortunately, I kind of think it was lucky for me to hear those type of stories to make sure that's not what my organization turned into. To make sure that we, as people who experience this type of violence, never turned into those organizations that try and kind of tokenize these people by pulling them out and by basically saying, you experience this type of violence, let me put you in a podium, let me get you to earn money for my organization. Because really, I say this all the time, at least within regards to gun violence, saving children's lives really isn't a Democrat or a Republican issue. It's not a this organization versus that organization issue. It's a human issue. And any organization that's not willing to take a step back or take a step forward when need be to work with other organizations is really creating a barrier to solving that exact issue. So that's just my experience with that. Yeah.
I mean, every town in this country has the same exact issue, right? I think it's human nature to deal with egos, to deal with all of the things that betray us in the end and keep us from meeting our missions, meeting our goals. But I think one thing that I've really tried to focus on is making sure that we're staying in our lane and that we're doing the best work that we can do And our litmus test is authentic demand, right? And that means that we're moving with people, right? That any issue sort of that we're moving on, one, we don't have many issues, right? We're very focused when building with our refugee groups. But that steering committee, that council that we have, needs to approve our work plan at the end of the day, so that we're an organization that's led by the people we say we serve. They're also in our leadership, they're also on our board, right? And so if we can stay true to that mission, and if we can stay true to that people, then everything else that's happening in the background is just noise. And I have the privilege of ignoring that because it distracts from my work plan and the work that I promised we were going to accomplish for our community. That said, we still need allies. Like, no one organization is going to solve the problem, right? So we need allies, and we need to be intentional about building those relationships. And so the way that I've addressed that is in the ways that I build relationships with organizations. So there are organizations that we have very deep ties with. We fundraise together. We check in on each other, and we take a step back or take a step forward, because that trust has been built over a long period of time, and we can have those types of conversations. We also have conversations that are about accountability. We can go on a coffee date, and I can say, hey, like, this is an issue we're working on. I'd really like it if your organization made sure these 3 things were not betrayed when you're, because our issues will intersect, right? We're not communities that live in silos, right? These problems don't exist in silos. They'll conflict, and sometimes there are competing priorities. And how do we make sure we don't throw one community under the bus, right? Or do a disservice to one community as we're trying to advance this one issue. And so it's about the communication, it's about making those agreements up front. And a lot of it is if you can plan well, right? If you know your legislative cycle, if you know what's coming up, and if you can plan well, you can usually negotiate so that your timing is spaced out enough where that sort of stuff isn't happening. But if it is, right, that there is enough of a relationship where you can have that conversation. There are some groups and some people you're just not going to be able to have that conversation with because you're dealing with people and people are messy, and that I think is okay. You don't take ownership of that, all right? And it also isn't a reflection of the work that you're doing and the work that your community is doing. So you got to keep it pushing, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, and I know it's always a little painful when you see other people doing the work that you're doing, and not only that, but taking credit for your work. But at the same time, we know that, as you said, we need a lot of people to be involved. And so you said it's human nature. People are going to do it. They're going to get involved. They're going to form similar organizations. I happen to be on the board of the Feminist Majority Foundation. Eleanor Smeal, Peg Yorkin, who founded this organization, and they were the first ones that talked about the gender gap, And let me just throw this out here too, because I think the one thing that ultimately we must not forget is that to solve all of these issues, we've got to make sure that we get people elected, okay? Progressive people elected at all levels, starting with school boards, starting with city councils, boards of supervisors, and commissioners, and definitely the Congress of the United States of America. So all of these issues, if we don't vote, if we don't get people elected, if we do not put it into the form of a law that it can be implemented, and that can hold people accountable, then a lot of the work that we do is for naught, So we just always got to keep that in mind. At the end of the day, we've got to get people elected to, solve the issues of gun violence and climate change and workers' rights, et cetera, and women's rights, et cetera. But in the meantime, that's going to happen. You're going to have a lot of different organizations. In the civil rights movement back in the 60s, we had the people that supported Malcolm X. And then we had people that supported Dr. Martin Luther King. And then we had the Black Panthers. And we had all of these different organizations that were fighting for civil rights. And they all had their nuances and kind of different focus for the organization. And that's the way it's going to be. And I think with all of the different issues, you're always going to have a ton of organizations. But the other thing, too, is nonprofits, okay? I know people are here probably here that belong to nonprofits. And a lot of people that belong to nonprofits and those that are listening out there, they think that somehow they cannot engage in electoral politics. You can, if your job is from 9 to 5, from 5 o'clock, after 5 o'clock, you can go out there and canvass. On weekends, you can go out there and you can advocate for candidates. So we shouldn't think that because you belong to a nonprofit that somehow you are handicapped and you can't do the important electoral work that needs to be done. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. You had a question.
Thank you. Hello. Hi, my name is Sahid. For about 30 years, I worked at the National LGBTQ Task Force. Dolores, you spoke at the 2009 Creating Change Conference in Denver. Hello again. So I'm trying to channel productive pessimism, staying in our lanes, and humanity. And what I have often thought in my activist life is that the genius of the machine of oppressions, which is the levers are pulled by humans, the genius of it is to so surgically and precisely target different groups of us so that at any one time, any group of us can feel and really have our backs against the wall. So today, it's reproductive justice activists and defending the right to abortion. We can go back and name many things. That just happens to be oppression du jour. So my question for each of you is, in an environment like this, where I actually feel that the attacks have accelerated, that the attacks are more vicious, and they are, I will say again, more surgically and precisely focused on very specific parts of communities. But in that context, share your thoughts on how we, not as the LGBTQ movement, not as the repro justice movement, not as the immigrant rights movement, not as the anti-gun violence movement, not as the labor movement, but how do we more, in a more consolidating way, actually work together? Almost every day since Trump was elected, I thought, oh, is this the day when we have the general strike and 15% of us actually really don't go to work? Because that's all it would take, 15%. That would be massive. That would be such a hit on capitalism. But I haven't made it happen either. Thank you.
So, to answer your question, so what was I gonna say? Oh, I remember, okay, a lot of what I do, because I recognize that we have to work within our own sectors of activism, whether it be, like I stated before, immigration rights, labor unions, gun violence prevention. We have to realize, we have to find the crossroads of our issues. And at least with gun violence prevention, in a lot of places, actually, everywhere, I realized very early on that gun violence is a symptom of a lot of other issues, especially in Black and brown communities. Gun violence is a symptom of poverty, is a symptom of food deserts, is a symptom of education in those communities not being funded by any means proportionally to the suburban communities near them. So realizing that so many issues are symptoms of other issues has really been how March for Our Lives has worked with other different organizations. Realizing that overall, at least with gun violence, I've seen how connected our issues are, finding those crossroads and working together, because realizing that we really all are trying to push towards one thing, which is just being able to survive and live a somewhat happy life. I'm realizing those main goals has really allowed us to push forward. Sorry.
Do you want to address the question?
It's interesting because when you talk about gun violence and why people own guns in the first place, it's like this ambience of fear of people being afraid of other people. For instance, there are more guns in California, in Hollywood and Beverly Hills, than there are in East Los Angeles, where the Latinos live, or South Central, where the African Americans live. That's kind of the thought. People don't think about that, So we have to kind of try to, get away with the fear, erase the ignorance, so people aren't afraid of each other. And that's promoted, I think, by people like the NRA, And in terms of our different groups working together, I think that we have to work together. We have to support each other's causes. I know, like my organization, people always say, why doesn't the Dolores Huerta Foundation, why don't you just focus on one issue? Well, we can't do that. We've got to be a multi-issue organization. We had the first Pride March in Bakersfield, California, ever. This is Kevin McCarthy, Congressman in Kevin McCarthy's district, who is our president calls Kevin McCarthy my Kevin. Donald Trump called him my Kevin. And so, we are in this really racist, kind of a bigoted area where we live, and so that's why we're there, that's why we're working there. But we have to work together on all these issues. And sometimes that might seem hard to do, but I don't think it really is. We just have to be cognizant of the fact that we just can't focus on one issue. And what I would love to see eventually, when we have these marches, is have one big march of all of the people in the United States. Have the Black Lives Matter March, the March for Our Lives, the Immigrant Rights March, labor rights, women's rights. If we could do one big march in Washington of all of us together, to really show that, number one, we're not going to let them divide us, We know that the issues of environmental justice are as important as the immigrant rights issue, because again, if our planet goes, ends, if one young person I heard say, I didn't know that Earth had a termination date, so we all have to work on all of these issues together, and there are ways to do it. So, and I don't know if that answers your question, and also kind of like when I speak to, I was speaking in Utah to a Mormon group, right? So I talked to them about LGBT rights and women's reproductive rights. And I talk to Latino organizations and I talk about these same issues. So we have to kind of spread the message and include it in everything, all the kind of work that we do.
Yeah.
Good, yeah. We probably have time for about one more question. Anyone? One more. Yeah. Oh, the mic is here. I'll grab this.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't know if it's, okay, it is on. Hi, how are you? My name is Alexandra Kingshaw, and I'm a recent graduate from the School of Industrial and Labor Relations from Cornell University. And my question is, in the world of activism and being just a human, and also being a human online and social media, I was wondering how to not feel so fatigued by not only the news cycle that's now on my Facebook timeline, but also the Twitter wars on in the comment section, and also just general fatigue of it all, but also realizing that you can't completely turn off, because that would be irresponsible to not be aware or not be a part of communities that do matter, especially to me being a young person who, there's people I've never even met, but I feel an affinity and a community with. And so my question is how to not feel tired when that is what you're feeling, how to keep having conversations. How else do I say that? How to continue to be aware and be a person, but also knowing when to break for your own mental health. Where is that line? And how do you, as what I see as experts, you're ahead in the level, in that, how do you manage that?
Okay, well, I'll start. So My organization, like I stated earlier on, was founded by a bunch of, excuse my language, like pissed off teenagers on their phones. So I really know what it's like to be tired from social media, and especially because gun violence, for some reason, is seen as such a divisive issue, which really I don't understand how saving lives could be a divisive issue. But honestly, all I can say is, one, like set limits for yourself. Myself trying to get better at this, like give yourself at least like 3 hours where you're not on social media, just not on social media. And also just read a book, go outside, do things that people used to do. Like, honestly, like as somebody that is 15 years old right now, I can't even drive yet. I should be able to in like 10 days. But just honestly, go outside, plant some plants. Like I love planting plants. Get away from that because I've really seen what social media can do to someone. I myself, it kind of perpetuated the struggles that I was having, especially during the grieving process. Because after what happened at my school, I was going through the grieving process of like multiple losses that I had, and dealing on top of that with people saying that I wasn't a real person, saying that I was a crisis actor. Dealing with a lot of that. The worst is especially when you lose close friends and somebody tells you that they weren't even real. Dealing with the darkest, deepest, most intolerant people on the internet is something that's really, really, really not great for mental health. But I think like all I can recommend is set limits for yourself. Talk to a therapist. I love my therapist. And just go outside and do things that people used to do before social media.
Yeah, a friend of mine recently told me that he was with the Dalai Lama, and he asked the Dalai Lama, do you ever think we will have peace in the world? And the Dalai Lama said yes. And he said he was surprised by the answer, and he said, how? He said, the internet. And that's really interesting when we think about all of the powers of organizing that young people have now with their computers, their cell phones, they can get all the information. Everything has to be transparent now. They can't hide anything because they can Google it, right, to find out what the answers are. And I think that's really something that we have to think about because these are additional powers that activists have that us way back in the 60s didn't have. But the other thing, and going back to the previous question about all of our different movements together, I really do believe that the haters, the reason that they focus on women's right to abortion, the reason that they focus on racism, on LGBT issues, is because they wanted to keep us divided. They want to keep the society divided. And as long as we are focusing on these cultural issues, we're not focusing on the real issues, which are the economic issues, okay? And we haven't really talked about that, about the situation that we're in our country right now, where you have 1% of the wealthy families in the United States own 50% of the wealth. 1%, like the Waltons that own Walmart. And by the way, friends don't let their friends shop at Walmart, okay? And so then you have 10% of the corporations that are, getting stronger with all these mergers. 10% of the corporations, plus the wealthy families, that own 50%, 90% of the wealth in the United States. 50% own 90% of the wealth of the United States of America. And so when we wonder why we don't have universal health care, like they have in Scandinavia and in Cuba, why don't we have pre-education like they have in the European countries and in Cuba, again, the little poor country with an economic boycott, and we say, okay, well, the wealth is all up here, and it's not there for the people. And we have to remember that we are the richest country in the world. We're the richest country in the world, and it is a crime that our citizens do not have those benefits. Another thing I just found out recently, which I never knew this, but after World War II, when the United States of America had the Marshall Plan, and we, the taxpayers of the United States, gave our tax money to Germany and to Japan so that they could, recover after World War II, our enemies, so they could recover. We actually funded the social programs for universal health care and for universal daycare for children. We, the United States of America, funded those programs in Germany, okay? But we don't have those programs in the United States of America. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so these are the things I think that we need to know and that, that we have to start acting on. In addition, I just want to throw this in there because we haven't talked about it, is stopping the school-to-prison pipeline. We have so many people, more people in prison in the United States of America than in any other country, even India or China, with populations of billions of people. We're only 300 million, but we have more people in prison than these other countries do. And who are the people in prison? It's black, it's brown, okay? And it's poor white people that are in prison. So, and people are making profits off of the bodies of our children, So these are things that we have to really think about, and it's our tax dollars, again, that are paying to keep people in prison.
Thank you. That's right. I just wanted to know everything that was just said around self-care, around the need to start thinking about these issues. We all, there's one or two issues that we're super passionate about and we want to dig in on, and we should, because we are human beings and we only have so much capacity and so many hours in our day. But, how do we also how do we think about how we're linking to other communities who we don't belong to, or maybe not connecting with it on an every single day basis, but our issues do overlap, do intersect. How are we reaching out? For example, I think the environmentalists, like people who are really out there fighting climate change, and they're thinking about policy solutions. In San Diego, we've got climate action plans that we are sort of getting every city to sort of implement. In these climate action plans, we're thinking about equity. How do we make sure that the benefits, right, of having greener, better communities, actually making sure that they go to the most vulnerable of our society who are less likely to withstand the effects of climate change, right? While wealthier, more well-resourced communities have opportunities to rebuild. So how are we thinking about that in our climate action plans? And how are environmental groups maybe reaching out to communities or community groups, social justice organizations that are working with those communities, right? So they're not sort of thinking in their silo like we're experts in climate, how to combat climate change. So we're just gonna figure it out for everyone, but that we're actively actually seeking out expertise from our social justice movement folk. Right? So I think that's one way to continue to build bridges and think about how our issues sort of connect and build together. The other thing is, I want to go back to what you said around, we really have to pay attention to our elections, right? I mean, if we want to fight mass criminalization, we need to change the DAs in our cities, in our counties, in our communities, right? Every single organization should be talking about that, right? Because it impacts all of us. We should be talking about progressive city councils and state legislatures and who are electing as our representatives in DC, because those are the people who are going to impact all of our issues. So those are the ways that we can all sort of unite and come together around candidates that speak to our truth, speak to our values, and that we can all share an ownership of, if you will, because we've all got membership lists. We're all connected to communities, and combined, that's an enormous amount of power that we can mobilize surgically, right, to get the kind of candidates elected that are going to produce the kind of change that we want. I just also want to say, like, just because we got someone elected doesn't mean they're going to be the magical unicorns that we need them to be all the time. And so we got to hold them accountable, and so we need to also make sure that we're uniting our lists and really combining that power to make sure they're doing the job that they promised us they do. Often they forget. And so I think that's just the reality, and we haven't figured that out, I would say, in the movement work, right? That we are so caught up in having our backs against the wall, as you mentioned, that we are always thinking in scarcity rather than abundance, right? instead of fighting and competing for resources, why aren't we thinking about the resources we have in people power, in lists, and combining them, and figuring out who the C4s are in our cities who are doing candidate work, and whether or not we belong to them, or whether or not, or challenging them to create space for us, right? So that we can do that. I think that is, if we our crippling factor again is, I think we are acting from a space of scarcity, both in resources, but also in the ways that we can work together, because we're what you mentioned about seeking credit and things like that. The irony of all that is people already know who's doing work. That's obvious. If you're true and if you've been doing work, it's clear to everybody else you've been doing the work because you've been showing up, right? And it's visible from your work. And if you haven't, that is also obvious. And so instead of really focusing on like who's doing what and like getting credit for work that it's obvious to everyone else who's doing, if it's not, maybe that's a comms issue, or like figuring out how we make our work more transparent, right, to our people, to our members, and to the people that we should be reporting to, but also like just moving forward, right, like building the kind of cross-movement solidarity to show up for each other in meaningful ways. And solidarity, I'm listening a lot and reading the writings of Deepa Iyer, who's an amazing activist that you all should be following on Twitter. And she has a podcast called Solidarity Is, right? And she talks a lot about solidarity as a practice. Like, it's not an act that you do one time to show up for March for Our Lives or the World Refugee Day thing. It's something that you're showing up consistently. And it's a practice, meaning that you have intentional relationships with people from that organization or from that community, and your act is consistent. It's not a one-time transactional thing, because you can pat yourself in the back for showing up for a rally or something like that. So, in the ways that we show up consistently for the work that keeps us moving, right? In the places that give us hope, right? Because Twitter and social media, yeah, it is kind of depressing, but like our outlet, it should be our movement work and the things that keep us motivated and give us hope for the future. That's where we should be putting our energy. And it's a practice, you got to keep doing it, right? You have to be consistent about it. And we have to be challenging our institutions and our organizations to share their lists. I know that's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of organizations. But really, if we're serious about change, right, we have to think about creating institutions that allow us to elect the kind of people we want, because we are sitting on an incredible amount of like resources, people power, if you will, just from things that we already have, right? Our membership lists and the ability that we have to communicate with our members and turn out voters. And so if we can do more of that, if we can just elect good people, right, we will all win.
Wow. Okay, well, I have the privilege and the difficult job of kind of summarizing all of that and commenting, but I want to say something that I've been thinking of since you asked your question about why we don't come together. It's such a historical tactic, divide and conquer, and white women, black women, et cetera, but it occurs to me that at the end of the day, we are all suffering. And we lead from the primary source of our suffering and pain, and that becomes our priority. So I think that thinking more about all of the different ways that we suffer and how, to your point, how they combine and intersect, moving away from that binary, and we are moving away from binary in our world, thank goodness, but to move away from black, white, us, them, and to really locate our suffering on a continuum and locate it within a system, to your point, a system that is at work, might help to bring us together a little bit more. So before we move on to the next part of our program, which I think is so brilliant, to have this and then we move into dinner and we keep talking and circling and talking, so I'm just going to try to pull together what I think I heard. And I'm sure I will miss a lot, but just to recap and reflect a little bit. So in building movements for change, what I heard was start with yourself. You are powerful, you are brave, you're resilient, you're strong, and you're a role model. Ask for help And that's a part of being powerful, is understanding when you're not powerful and when you're vulnerable and when to ask for help. Start small. 4 to 6 people in your living room is all you need. And then recruit. Don't cannibalize each other. Be true to your mission. Be planful. Communicate. Educate. Make laws. And above all, have hope and faith and love. Thank you so much.
I would like to do something here, and I usually try to end all of my talks because that's how I raise money for my foundation, by speaking. But I would like to just, a lot of you asked us the questions, so I want to ask you a question, okay? And I want to precede that question with a quote from Coretta Scott King. And Coretta Scott King said this: "We will never have peace in the world until women take power." But with Coretta's permission, I amended that to say we will never have peace in the world until feminists take power. And the reason I say that, because as you know, there are differences in the way women think, okay? But also, men can be feminists also, all right? All the men here who support women's rights and immigrants' rights, LGBT rights, who care about climate change, et cetera, are also feminists. And so I would like to ask the audience a question, and I want them to answer me with a really loud voice. And the question that I'm going to ask you, who has the power? And I want you to say, we have the power. And when I say, what kind of power? I want you to say, people power. But I want you to shout it so loud that the neo-Nazis can hear us, okay? The white nationalists, the homophobes, you know, the misogynists, the sexual harassers, the bigots, okay? So that they can hear us, okay? So, are you ready? Yeah. Okay, let's go. Who's got the power? We have the power. What kind of power? People power. So after this wonderful panel, what are we going to do? Are we going to go out there? Are we going to organize? What do we say? And I would like to say it in Spanish. Sí se puede, which means yes, we can. So what do we say? Are we going to go out there and organize? Sí se puede. We talk about, let's do it with an organized hand clap all together. Unify. Sí se puede. Sí se puede. Sí se puede. Sí se puede. Thank you.
And is this, yes, this is on. Thank you. I don't know what to say after that, except I'm hungry. I don't know about you, but I would like to welcome everyone here, whether you have a name tag on or not. Name tags should have little numbers in the corner indicating what table you're sitting at. If you don't have a name tag or you haven't been assigned to a table, just see some of our volunteers at the registration desk, and we'll find a place for you. We want you to continue the conversation that was started here by these amazing women, and share your stories at your tables. So I will end that here and just direct you to the dinner is in the press room, which is actually just on this side. Easier if you go out and around. So just go out the doors you came in and wrap right around, and you will find the press room where we will have dinner. So thank you.